You've heard Jesus say it before. Enter through the narrow gate. You've probably heard it in sermons, read it in devotionals. Maybe you've even quoted it to someone else. Wide is the gate, broad is the road, narrow is the way that leads to life. Simple, clear, familiar. But here's a question most of us were never asked. What did you have to leave behind to get through it? Not what you believe, not what you profess, not what you agree with. What did you actually have to let go of? Because the problem may not be that the gate is hard to find. The problem might be we keep trying to bring things through it that were never meant to fit. In Matthew 7, Jesus isn't speaking to a small group of skeptics. He's speaking to a crowd, people who are listening, people who are interested, people who would likely say they believe in God. And he tells them many are on the wrong road, not because they're openly rejecting God, but because they're walking a path that requires nothing from them. A road wide enough to carry everything they've always held on to. Their pride, their self-direction, their quiet compromises, even their version of faith that never really cost them anything. It's a road that feels spiritual, but never presses them. And then Jesus says something that should stop us longer than it usually does. Small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life. That word narrow doesn't just mean small, it carries the idea of pressure, restriction, compression, a space where not everything can go with you. In other words, the narrow gate is not just about where you're going, it's about what you're willing to release to get there. Most of us don't struggle to understand that the road is narrow. We struggle with what that actually means for us. Because if we're honest, many of us have learned how to approach Jesus without ever being confronted by him. We've learned how to believe without ever being pressed. We've learned how to follow without ever really having to let go. And that works on the wide road. It doesn't work on the narrow one. Scripture gives us a quiet but unmistakable pattern. Lay aside every weight, Hebrews 12:1. Deny yourself, Luke 9:23. Put off the old self, Ephesians 4:22. These aren't suggestions for spiritual growth later on. They are descriptions of what it looks like to walk with God at all. And yet, it's possible to hear all of that and still carry things Jesus never asked us to bring. Here's where this becomes personal. Because the things we try to carry through the narrow gate aren't always obvious sins. Sometimes they look like strengths, things we've relied on for years, ways we've learned to function, ways we've learned to stay in control. Self-reliance that feels responsible, pride that disguises itself as conviction, comfort that quietly replaces surrender. We don't call these things burdens, but they don't pass through narrow places very easily. There's a reason Jesus uses this imagery. A narrow space forces a decision. You can't just walk through casually. You have to stop, look at what you're holding, and decide what goes and what doesn't. And that's where many of us hesitate, not because we don't see the gate, but because we recognize what it will cost to go through it. This is where the teaching of Jesus becomes deeply personal, because he doesn't just describe the gate. In John 10:9, he says, I am the gate. In John 14:6, he says, I am the way. So now, this is no longer abstract. The narrow gate isn't just a principle, it's a person. And coming to him means more than agreeing with him. It means coming as you are, but not expecting to remain that way. There's something important to say here, especially for those who have walked with the Lord for many years. This is not about earning your way into life. It's not about proving yourself worthy. Salvation is a gift. Always has been, always will be. But when that gift is received, it begins to reshape the one who receives it. Not all at once, not perfectly, but genuinely and inevitably. So the question isn't, have I heard about the narrow gate? The question is, what in my life has actually been laid down because of it? What has changed? What has been surrendered? What have you stopped holding on to because it no longer belongs on this road? For some, it may be obvious, a habit, a pattern, a choice that never aligned with God's will. But for others, it's quieter than that. It's the need to always be right, the refusal to be corrected, the subtle belief that you've already arrived. It's the kind of thing that doesn't look like rebellion on the outside, but quietly resists transformation on the inside. And this is where the narrow road does its deepest work, not in dramatic moments, but in steady pressure, in the kind of moments where God gently puts his finger on something and says, "That doesn't come with you," not to take something good away, but to make room for something better. The wide road never asks that question. It lets you carry everything. It never interrupts you, never confronts you, never presses you to change. And because of that, it can feel very comfortable, even convincing. But the narrow road will not leave you untouched. It won't let you stay the same, not because God is harsh, but because he is committed to forming something in you that cannot be formed any other way. Jesus once said you would know people by their fruit, not by how much they know, not by how long they've believed, not by how convincing they sound, but by what their life produces. And fruit doesn't come from standing still. It comes from a life that has been shaped over time, pruned, refined, pressed. So maybe the most honest question isn't, do I believe in the narrow gate, but rather, is there evidence that I've gone through it? Not in perfection, but in direction, in movement, in the quiet, ongoing work of God changing things in me that I could not change on my own. Because here's the truth we don't always say out loud. It's possible to stand very close to the narrow gate and never actually go through it, to admire it, to agree with it, to teach it even, and still hold on to the very things that keep you from entering fully. But the invitation of Jesus has never changed. He doesn't stand at the gate to turn people away. He stands there to receive them, fully, willingly, graciously. But he also loves us enough not to let us bring everything with us. So maybe today, the question isn't about understanding something new. Maybe it's about seeing something clearly, something you've known for a long time, but haven't fully faced. What are you still trying to carry through a gate that was never meant to fit it? And more importantly, are you willing to lay it down? Because life isn't found on the road that lets you keep everything. It's found on the one that changes you as you walk it. And that road begins at a gate that is narrow, not to keep you out, but to lead you into something far greater than what you'd ever be able to carry in.